All right, hey everyone. So last time we talked, we looked into these ideas about how do we really determine what our competitively valuable capabilities and our resources really are. What is it that makes one resource competitively valuable, whereas not all are? How do we determine these things, and then essentially their importance to tying these into our strategy and making sure that we utilize these effectively as a part of our strategy, because by definition they are competitively valuable, right? Well, along these same lines, another important thing that we usually talk about when we want to talk about understanding our internal environment or those things going on within our organization is something you may have been exposed to in the past. And that is this idea of the SWOT framework. So maybe you've heard of doing a SWOT analysis in some classes, or what we call strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. SWOT, SWOT. All right. Now, in case you're not familiar with this from former classes, SWOT analysis is basically one of these analyses that we use to focus on our firm's competitively important strengths and weaknesses, market opportunities, and external threats that might adversely impact our firm's well-being in the future. Okay. This framework has considerable managerial value. Basically just because it helps us as managers really identify all of the factors that are needed in order to craft a winning strategy that fits well with our firm's overall internal and external situations. So while we've been really focused in the most recent, in our most recent video meetings here on the internal elements of our business, it doesn't mean that's all there is to consider, right? We've obviously talked about our external environment. This is one of those frameworks that kind of brings both together and starts discussing them, how it kind of creates this full package for us. So the things that our SWOT analysis really looks at, and the things that we would use it for managerially, is first and foremost at the top there, what are our competitively important strengths and competitive assets? So tying our strategy to, our most competitively potent resources and capabilities, like what we were talking about before, is our best bet. And honestly, it's pretty much a no risk proposition, right? There's nothing to lose, a lot to gain. Our strengths can be something, we're good at doing. It could be a competitively valuable resource. They could be a competitively important achievement or attribute that is really strongly contributing to our company's competitiveness, any of these things. What we want to do is we want to identify what those things are. Now, not just focusing on those positive things, but understanding the weaknesses as well, right? A weakness, a competitively important weakness in that sense, or a deficiency, is something that, let's say, we are currently lacking, or it could be something we do poorly, or something that we just notice puts us at a disadvantage in our marketplace based off of some of those key success elements that we talked about earlier on. So resource weaknesses, that are related to things like inferior or unproven skills or capabilities in our important areas of business. These are big deficiencies for us, right? These lead to, weaknesses for us, inabilities to compete, and we're trying to avoid those things, but we must identify them as part of this framework, right? We don't just want to know our strengths, but we want to realize our weaknesses as well, so we can understand what those are, and we don't tie any of our strategic plan to those things. So we either avoid those elements, or we figure out how to strengthen those things later so that we can, essentially incorporate them back into our strategy. We also want to look for market opportunities and identify them outside of our organization, right, in this external environment. So to tailor our strategy to our situation, we have to identify and appraise our market opportunities and growth and profit potential that each of those potentially has. We always have opportunities we could potentially expand outward, but we want to know what the growth and profit potential are for those in order to determine if they're really valuable opportunities worth highlighting in this situation. So our firm's market opportunities might be plentiful in some situations. And sometimes when we do this, we might find that actually they're really scarce and we don't have a lot of them. Some of them may be lasting, and we would say, wow, that opportunity provides us an avenue that could go on for forever. It could be really long lasting opportunity for us. And others might just be something we can take advantage in the short term of. Some might be attractive. Some might be marginally interesting to us. Some might be unsuitable for our situation, but we really want to try to focus on market opportunities that exist and start determining whether or not they're one that might be competitively attractive for us. And finally, not just the opportunities, but the things that tend to dampen those opportunities, those external threats to our future well-being, right? So factors within our external environment that could pose threats to our profitability and competitive well-being. These can vary in importance, but they all are important for us to catalog and understand what those are, right? The importance is, again, we need to place extra emphasis on those things that are hindering our ability to go after market opportunities that could be lucrative for us. We need to understand what those roadblocks are that might get in the way of us utilizing those opportunities that we've identified and going after them. Because if we see an opportunity, we want to be able to go after it, right? It just makes sense. Now, 4 conditions we want to remember. 4 conditions are going to be necessary in order for our strategy to be a good, or even better, an excellent fit with our overall situation. So first and foremost is the foundation and the centerpiece of our strategy has to be our competitively powerful resources and capabilities right there. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. We have to have a focus on how we craft our strategy surrounding those strengths and capabilities. Furthermore, our strategy has to include actions to correct our weaknesses. We can't just accept them. We have to include actions to correct our weaknesses that would make us vulnerable, right? So it's not enough just to highlight and see these things and say, oh, nothing we can do about it, right? We have to start also incorporating into our strategy ways to lessen the vulnerability that arises from those weaknesses. Our strategy also has to include initiatives on how we're going to capture those market opportunities. So after we figured out which of these opportunities is best suited to our strengths and our competitive assets, how are we going to go out and get them, right? Our most potent resources and capabilities should always spearhead those initiatives. So tying those strengths to how do we go after those opportunities by utilizing those strengths. And then finally, our strategy needs to include something about our efforts to defend against those external threats that we've identified that can adversely impact our long-term business prospects and, put us, put our survival at risk, essentially. So we want to identify essentially the strengths so that we can use them to go after those opportunities we've identified. And the rest of our strategy also has to, identify and acknowledge the fact that weaknesses and threats exist, and what are we going to do about it? Our strategy has to incorporate elements that address these important things. For your own, for your own good, if you like to look through them, these are great signs of potential strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are great examples of each of these categories. These are all in those notes I provide you. So if you want to skim over them, give them a good look over, figure out when you're doing assessments in the future, what kinds of things to be looking for or keep on your radar. These are all great examples of these different things. At the end of the day, essentially, the payoff from doing our SWOT analysis comes from the conclusions about our situation that we translate into action. How do we improve our company's strategy based off of what we've identified in those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats elements of that SWOT analysis? So The SWOT is essentially, like it says here, going to guide us in crafting our strategy, because it's going to help us understand how can we fit our internal and external situations well, how do we build or strengthen our competitive advantage using those strengths, and how can we boost our strategic and financial performance by figuring out how to, utilize those opportunities and use our strengths in order to get them. By crafting a strategy, as it says here, that is informed by these things, we're going to have a strategy, hopefully, that passes the test of that winning strategy idea that we've been talking about all the time up until this point.